our panelists today. Eric Johnson has joined us from Open Books. He's the executive director over there since November 8, 2018. And before that served as senior director for philanthropic partnerships with Building Educated Leaders for Life, BELL. Prior to BELL, he served as director of development for capacity building in the Illinois Network of Charter Schools and chief development officer at the Golden Apple Foundation. Our next panelist is Kris Salyards of the Harbour, located in Highland Park. She's a graduate of the University of Chicago of Social Services Administration. She's been doing social service field work for over 25 years from both the United States and the UK. And she has, I don't know if you know the Harbour, it's a shelter for youth in transition, homelessness transition. And she's been there. She became executive director in 2016. Joy Decker is joining us, executive director of Esperanza Community Services. And Esperanza Community Services is dedicated to serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to improve their quality of life. Joy has joined Esperanza in 2014 and is over 27 years working in social service organization. Christa Hamilton is joining us. She has spent 9 years as chief executive officer and executive director of Centers for New Horizons, a nonprofit organization that assists children, youth, and family attain self-reliance. She oversees the day-to-day operations of the organization and has served as director of New Horizons workforce development effort. And then finally, our last panelist is our own Rachelle Jervis, who, as you all know, is CEO of Executive Service Corps and has served as regional director of Illinois chapter director and Chicago area director for the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. She was also the founding member of the board of Chicago Friends School. So these are our panelists who all have years and years of experience running nonprofits. And so we're going to talk today about the opportunities and obstacles of non-fundraising revenue in our new day, as it were. I'm going to start off with a pretty general question to everybody. And basically, what has been the biggest challenge your organization has faced since the lockdown order after March 17th, March 20th? And
I'll get started. Okay, hi everyone. Once again, I am the executive director of Centers for New Horizons. We have about 325 employees, and we service from, I like to say, from pre-K to gray. So we have early education programs all the way to senior programs and kind of everything in the middle. And the biggest challenge was we just weren't prepared to work remotely. We're an in-person direct service organization. You know, we touch people, we have daycares. So my staff, you know, everybody didn't have a phone, didn't have a laptop, because that's just not how we operate. So the immediate pivot for us and we're nonprofit, so, you know, clearly we don't have tons of money in the bank to order 300 people laptops and hotspots. So it was really trying to figure out, how do we continue to work in the midst of a pandemic, not even knowing what does a pandemic even mean to the world. So our immediate challenge was how to continue doing our work when we typically engage people, and then we service very vulnerable populations. So this clearly was going to impact them in a way that they will go into crisis mode and need us even more, but we wouldn't be in the office to assist them. So that was our immediate challenge, was how to continue doing our work without all the proper technology and equipment that would be needed to do the work.
I think that's a big issue for especially direct service organizations.
Yeah, Kate, I was going to further what Christa had said, and we serve, we have 5 houses of young women who are in transition, so providing stable housing for young women, and we have apartment-based housing, and we have an emergency shelter. And the first and the biggest challenge was to decide whether or not we were going to change how we served homeless youth. Ultimately, we said no, we're going to keep doing business as usual in terms of how we serve. But, you know, I think that the transition for us was, how do we know that we're going to keep everybody safe? So it was restructuring the environment to make sure that you have a quarantine space. It was communicating with staff who have high anxiety about bringing in new kids when you don't really know exactly where they've been. And I think that that thread of staff anxiety for our direct service workers, because they can't opt out, they can't work remotely, they still have to come in. And so I think that managing the staff anxiety and bringing in kids at a normal pace, which we've been very busy, that's been a really complicated challenge to navigate. And so we ended up going to commercial grade disinfectant services, right? And you don't really have a budget for that. You put in the pumps with the soap pumps and the antibacterial sanitizer because you can't find it anywhere. And so you're adding costs to protect your people. And those changes came really fast. Where sometimes I think in social services, it takes a long time to move the needle and not for profit. I think the needle moved pretty fast for us because we had to take what we're used to, which is direct service, high touch, working with people, relationship building, and all of a sudden we're doing it in a screen environment, you know, and supporting staff and supporting youth. So Christa, I hear you. I do not have nearly the number of staff you have. So I think you're experiencing what I'm experiencing 5 times more. My heart goes out to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is Joy. Good morning, everyone. Similar to Kris and Christa, so, you know, as Kate mentioned, we serve adults and children with disabilities. So we have a large school, and the kids that we serve have significant challenges as far as behavior and different behavior challenges, and on the more severe end, on the autism spectrum. So I think for us right away, in terms of flipping to remote learning, was just a challenge in and of itself, in terms of our kids are so visual and hands-on, and we really had to think of different ways in terms of how to promote that distance and remote learning. So that, and then technology, similar to what other folks have said, is our folks, we had to very quickly assess what type of technology challenges our families had. And then on the adult side of what Esperanza does is we have residential homes for people with disabilities. And if you guys have been, you know, hearing about the congregate settings, and that seems to be a hotbed in terms of, you know, staff coming in and out of the homes to care for our folks, and that's really close contact that they're having with our individuals. That was a challenge of, you know, again, how do we provide those services while keeping our staff safe? And initially, we did, I think, what everyone else did, tried to get face masks and you know, increased our cleaning. But then very quickly, with having 7 or 8 staff coming into homes, we said, you know, we've got to keep folks safe. And so we flipped very, I would say I was impressed how quickly we were able to do this, into a live-in model. So we have staff that have volunteered to live in our homes with our folks, and this is week 5 of that now. It's extremely expensive, I'm going to say. So we'll talk about other challenges, I think, but that was one thing that I think unanimously with our board and our other stakeholders in our union, that we said we have to do this. So I have just been so inspired by the staff that have come in every day and have volunteered to live in with our guys. So that's some of the challenges we had initially, and then some of the things that we did to maybe hopefully overcome them. So
Joy, Kris and Christa have named a lot of things. Open Books, we're a literacy-focused organization. We serve thousands of kids every year through our literacy programs that runs the gamut from birth to 12th grade. And we push into schools, typically CPS. We pull kids into our space in both the Lake and Pilsen locations. And so shuttering our doors to those programs has proven difficult, not only because I think we all underestimate the importance of day-to-day about human interaction when it comes to educating, and that richness of communication that you get when an adult is in front of children, but also the unpreparedness, I think, that was alluded to when it comes to teaching virtually and delivering content virtually. It's a very different ballgame, and I actually have 10 and 7-year-old daughters, and we've had to adjust to homeschooling, and it is a very different game that's bearing out in personal and professional lives. And so that it raises one challenge. We've also learned through statistics from the city, up to 1 out of 3 families on the south and west side don't have high quality broadband. And so when we're talking about a virtual environment, how do you deliver services to families that do not have access to the delivery mechanism now, when you've eliminated schools and libraries as safe physical spaces in which kids can learn? Last but not least, our revenue model is actually predicated on both philanthropy and book sales. So we take in about 1.5 million or more donated books every year, which we either grant to kids or we sell in our retail spaces. Obviously, without the retail spaces open, it severely handicapped the way that we approach raising money. I know that that's not what this is about, but it's a trickle-down effect throughout the rest of the organization. And we've done a nice job pivoting and keeping the engines moving, but it will be nice to be out of this so we can be back in front of kids, especially.
I know a lot of nonprofits are on a June, July schedule. Some of them are on an annual schedule, but you've obviously had to adjust your fundraising and your revenue goals already.
So, hello, I'm Rachelle Jervis. I'm the president and CEO of Executive Service Corps, and I would say it's made it very complicated because so much is out of our control, and so we had to convert our annual fundraiser to be a online fundraiser, and then we had to pivot it again to doing a video celebration, and then we had to pivot that yet again to have it be a series of videos, because some of the people we're honoring are in the trenches trying to keep their charities alive, and we didn't want to take time away from that for our fundraising. So we've had to evolve that a lot, and I think what we're facing is we normally have like a 3-pronged approach, which is sort of individual donations, foundations, and fee income. The primary source of fee income is nonprofits contributing between 5 and 10% of the cost of services to ESC to support our mission. And when nonprofits don't know what's coming and they don't know how to allocate their resources, they're hesitant to engage in projects, and they want to postpone projects they've committed to and wait to commit to new projects. They're apprehensive about what their staff is going to look like, what their resources are going to look like, what the future is going to look like. So that kind of takes that away. Then the other 2 pieces are sort of challenged directly by COVID, right? So for foundations, they have really focused on their funding on emergency services to keep people alive during the quarantine in terms of food and health care. And that's wonderful, but that also means that they're both not funding our clients in terms of our clients' operations, so our clients have less money, and also not funding capacity building so that we're affected that way. And then the third sort of place where we tend to get income is individual donations. And as people continue to face unemployment, economic insecurity, decreased value of their investments, they're more and more hesitant both to make individual donations and to ask their employers to make donations to the charitable causes that matter to them. So all of that is saying that it's affecting us significantly. And it's one of these things where we have to continuously evaluate to try and figure out how to make it work and what realistic goals should be, and how to evolve our approach to ensure that we exist for the next 42 years.
Ben, we've thought about this in 2 parts because it's just a logical way to do it. This fiscal year, which ends on June 30, and then July 1, which starts the next. In both cases, we are presented with similar challenges. We just don't know how long this thing is going to go. On the one hand, we've thought about how do we make it to July 1? What things can we do based on the limited options that we've got? We've applied for emergency funding through the Small Business Association. We're very fortunate to have received that. Participated in Giving Tuesday yesterday and are doing a spring campaign, but really thinking about the future and the uncertainty that's there. I have some members of my board that are saying we need to plan for a doomsday. This could go on for a year, despite reopenings and lightening of stay at home orders and so forth. Others are a bit more optimistic, but we've done a range of budget scenarios. We have 4 or 5 different scenarios that predicate opening fully in the summer and the fall, January 1, and then that doomsday budget that looks at this being our new normal for up to a year. We have a call today with our finance committee. It's going to be very interesting to see where they land, but we have to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. Is probably the shortest way I can put it.
I think for the Harbour, we have historically been a primarily government agency in providing direct services as a service. And 3 years ago, we decided to make the pivot to become a community-based organization and a charity of choice. And so as a development department, we have built 25% of our general revenue on our annual fund through events. And our events for this fiscal year appear to be, it was canceled with a net revenue loss of a substantial amount. And then next year, for the calendar year, knowing that we may lose our fall event, you're already, approaching the year with a gap. And then hearing the doomsday budget from the state in terms of if they will be able to pay, when they'll be able to pay. I think that there's just a lot of anxiety because as an essential service for teens and you can't stop working, your alternative, especially for our homeless youth, is there is that other piece, which is, am I going to have to re-traumatize kids and create homelessness in kids again? And so it's not only a budget issue for us, it's also challenging our core values and mission, which it is for everyone. We've all established ourselves as a much needed service. And I think it does provide some personal anxiety and challenges for us, in terms of where we thought we were going and where we are, where we look like we're going. We're also in the middle of a capital campaign, which is the first of our history. And it's not that we're building because we want to build, it's because we're building because we have to build, or we lose our flagship program because the site is just no longer feasible for the kids. So I think that there's just, if we survive, I keep joking with my board, I've had the fastest training schedule of any ED I've ever met.
So it's interesting because I had these huge plans. We don't do the best with huge fundraisers. So we've done like smaller fundraisers in the past, but we're turning 50 years old next year. So I had a huge marketing plan to just like blow this 50-year anniversary away and have a huge celebration for next year. So we're still going to push forward with our plans. Just not sure of the commitment of people that committed to help support us with the fundraiser. So like just for example, we had a bank that was funding us for a program, and as soon as the pandemic started to impact us, they contacted us and said, hey, unfortunately we're not going to be able to give you those funds for the purpose that we agreed to. But if you are doing some COVID relief funding, planning, then we'll help support that. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to give you the funding. So that was an indicator to me of what's to come. I mean, absolutely preparing for this crisis or, responding to this crisis is important. But that's just, as we planned out what our budget looks like. And I think Eric, I agree with Eric. More so we are fiscal year July 1 to June 30th. So I've already created, this is a wash for this year at this point. How do I plan for next year? because it's time for us to start creating budgets for our organization. And we're actually just gonna err on the side of let's say we may not get any private funding next year. And then we have lots of government funding as well, and we don't know what that'll look like on the government side either. So for fundraising, you know, we really like thinking about budgeting like a very, very small amount, and just finding out what happens.
Just to add a little bit, you know, similar to what everyone said, and Eric, you know, we're doing the same thing in terms of budget planning, scenario planning, and, you know, kind of our doomsday, kind of the different scenarios. So we're doing that. But the other thing that we are looking at is, again, and I think, Kris, you may have mentioned this with some of your programming, is, you know, how do we provide those services in a different way? So, you know, we've got an adult day program for folks that has been shut right now. And so we're thinking about when we are going to reopen. What does that look like? Do we have staggered days? Do we close for one day so we can do some deep cleaning on let's say a Friday? You know, what other social distancing can we do? And it's really challenging us and other providers to say, is this are we starting to look at this as a day program for adults with disabilities without walls? You know, what does that mean? And so, you know, from a programming aspect, we're really trying to struggle, but also balance. You know, there's a lot of it's unknown. We are, as many other folks have mentioned, we're also funded by the government. We are about 90%, so we're really risky in that way. And, you know, part of this is also with that comes a lot of regs and rules. So, you know, we're also waiting to see what DHS is going to bring forth as far as directives. So it's that balance of planning and being prepared, but not going down too far into that where, you know, COVID and other things are going to change. So and then the last thing I wanted to mention as far as planning, it's also thinking of staff, because I think that's the other thing that we've been trying to also help folks is kind of shift the mindset and, you know, help especially the supervisors and leaders and their leading teams and saying, you know, trying to do a Zoom meeting and that was all new, but this might be our new normal for a while, you know, so how do we rally teams? How do we keep our core values as an organization going? So we're also thinking from an HR perspective and the teams to kind of preserve them as well. So just a few things.
The challenges are immense. You are all facing them, but you do have staff. So I'd love to hear kind of so what opportunities have presented yourself? Like, for example, I am on half of your mailing list. So I know that Open Books is doing a video storytime hour, moving their program to the virtual, and rallying your staff behind those program decisions, or actually having your staff come up with these ideas. I'd love to hear some of the successes. And I'm going to call on Eric because I know you have at least 3.
Yeah, I was going to let others go first, but since you named me, I can jump in. So we are doing a few things. It's really hard, as I mentioned earlier, to translate in-person interaction, which, you know, our education system is predicated on. We're doing the best we can, and we're actually getting pretty good reviews, and at least from the team internally, including board. We're moving a lot of our story time efforts, which is focused on birth through 3rd grade, to Facebook events, other places where we can do live streams. Carefully, of course, one of the things that we are cautious about, especially with Zoom bombing and everything else that's going on, is certainly privacy, and making sure that people are not coming into our spaces. And so that's been successful, and we've, I think, exercised the appropriate level of caution to protect families and to make sure that we're hitting the right audience. We're doing pre-recorded read-alongs, so creating a library of read-alongs that kids can follow. I did one myself where I read an Elephant and Piggy book within 4 to 5 minutes, and so it's just giving families several more options. We also were approached by a brand new donor, which was just fortuitous, call it serendipity. Found us somewhat accidentally, just moved into the West Loop. Had always wanted to start a writing contest, and we had been talking about that for years, even prior to my time. And so we are doing our first annual creative writing contest for 3rd through 12th graders in different categories. And so I think the larger theme here is, while we can't replicate everything, and we're not even going to pretend to, we are doing two things: translating those things we can translate to online, but also using this time as I like to call it, somewhat of an experimental lab. You know, what are the things that we've always wanted to think about with a little bit more time and flexibility that could translate well into virtual settings? And if this is a new normal, it's a great time to test out new programs and theories that we might have on how we can engage kids and parents.
We've been doing similar things with technology. So I mentioned that we have preschools, which is interesting because we have 6-week-old children to 5-year-old children, but we went into e-learning as well. So we're doing like Zoom circle times for our children. We're sending home instruction materials for parents so they can work with their infants at home. And then we're also doing our after school programming on Zoom as well. It's been a challenge because a lot of our families are low income, so they don't have the internet support at home to join us. And they do have the school system did give out Chromebooks, but they'll have to give those back in at the end of June. So we're not really sure what the summer looks like for that program as well. And then we're just connecting with people virtually the same way. So social media, through Zoom and telephone calls. A lot of our seniors, they actually don't have video access, so we have to do phone calls with them as well. So I think, but the technology, and I think, I'm sorry, I forgot all of the question, but the technology is something that we're going to take with us after the pandemic. We weren't using technology well at all. So now, you know, I'm impressed at how quickly the team was able to ramp up and put together this program. And our board of directors, they've been extremely supportive because, like I said, at first I really felt like helpless at the beginning, like, what are we going to do? But the team was amazing. They came up with these great ideas and they're using technology in such an amazing way. I'm kind of, you know, slapping myself on the wrist, like, why haven't we been doing this? Because some people have engaged that normally can't get engaged because, for example, our workforce program, if the orientation is at 9 o'clock on Wednesdays and they didn't make it, they had to wait until next Wednesday at 9 o'clock. But we could have done it at 5 o'clock, or we could have, you know, there's all these other options that we just weren't thinking of. So it has definitely been eye-opening in that way of how we could have been using technology to connect more.
We were really fortunate because last year our tech team did a very large analysis of the technology opportunities for us and began transitioning us to using platforms virtually. We always work with both local and national and international organizations, but over the last 4 years, every year we've had at least one big international client whose headquarters was not in the Chicagoland area. And so on a project by project basis, we had kind of evolved what we were doing, but we wanted it to be system wide. And so they did a great analysis, shared the tools, and we all started moving to using that last year. And that really put us in the place of being prepared, experienced, and knowledgeable in terms of providing remote services going into this year. And it's really to their credit that was possible. And I think that part of the reason we've been able to develop so many wonderful resources for nonprofits during COVID has been that we didn't have to figure out, well, what does it mean for us to provide services remotely? What does it mean for us to be out in the field? We already knew that, and we were already doing that, and we could already make that work. And so we could focus on how do we take what we already know and what works for us and explain it in a way that's accessible and helpful, and make it available as quickly as possible to nonprofits for free. And so that's where we've been focused, and really it's to that committee's credit. So I know a couple of them are in this meeting, so thank you to all of them.
Things as far as opportunities. So similar to Eric and others, you know, we are also having some, I guess, more time to maybe examine in a deeper way as we plan some of our systems. You know, so one thing that's really coming out for us is our HR. You know, we are a typical social service agency where we don't have an HR director, and that responsibility gets shared amongst folks. And as we grew with, you know, other folks started to take on some of those responsibilities. But it's really, you know, as we look at kind of the new normal, right? Working from home, working remotely, distance learning, what are the different policies that we're having to put in place to give direction to our staff? So, you know, we're that's just one example where we're taking a little deeper dive in looking at the systems we have in place and how do we prepare and how do we plan. And the other thing I think that's created an opportunity for us is, again, with our school, with the staff we were looking to hire, because we serve such a significant, or kids with such significant behaviors, we focus on a lot of those skill sets being in person in the classroom. Now that we're remote, we're finding that there's some other skills that are having to really be kind of just coming to light in terms of how to, because we're serving the families much more than just the students. And so, how do we care for the families? How do we customer service is what we're calling it now. How do we do those soft skills? So, as we go forward, we're also thinking, what type of staff, what type of skill sets are we going to need in this new normal? And then lastly, I think just partnerships. Partnerships and collaboration isn't a new thing for us, right? But I think it's shifted for us in terms of partners we've had now are providing different things. So, and this is probably heard this, is distilleries are making hand sanitizer. And because we run these residential homes and, we needed a lot of that. So we were able to work with them and get donations for hand sanitizer. So, looking at our partners, but then relying on new partnerships as we have to provide different services to our families. So just interesting how some of these opportunities are coming to light under a pandemic.
So I think for us, we've been able to slow down as a team and have more deliberate and effective meetings, because I think the advantage of being in a team collaborative environment is sometimes there's a lot of collaborating going on all the time. And it sort of diminishes our ability to problem solve on our own. And I think this has led the team to start thinking critically about how they approach their work and how and when they pull their team meetings together, especially if you have a 40-minute Zoom call because you can't afford the platform, right? You have 40 minutes to solve the world's problems. You're like, all right, what's the agenda? So I think that in addition to this, my team has been innovative in finding ways where they've been able to reflect on their practice. And my therapist actually created T-Rex Thursday, Tuesday, which means that she has a 30-minute training topic that she provides to the staff. So now the staff are getting more meaningful inputs because there's a time for it, and it's Zoom, so you don't have to make sure that the kids are supervised in other environments. The kids are giving the space for them to get on that call. And so also just taking a deep data dive into our history to see if the program is as effective as we think it is. We have that time now to do some good reflection, and we've already created a plan of work for next year in terms of how we're going to modify our programs to better meet the needs of kids. And so I think from a practice perspective, this has really given us an opportunity to shine a light on what we do, how we do it, and how we're thinking about that work.
Wonderful. I have to say the cutoff on Zoom is my favorite thing. Gotta go, it's 5 minutes, let's wrap up. And so in the interest of time, we have some questions that we will take. I have some hands raised over here. So Norman, why don't you go ahead and take yourself off mute and ask your question?
One of the panelists mentioned rallying the staff, and I found that to be a very intriguing phrase, and I'm just wondering how you rally the staff, and I guess that motivate them and make them feel engaged and happy and hopeful.
So one of the things that we have done is just, taking some time, I think, in the beginning of meetings to just give them some space. I think giving them space to talk about what's going on, how they're feeling, has been something that we have been able to do. But I think it's also fun things, planning a, virtual mini happy hour, on a Thursday night or a Friday night. I had a team meeting yesterday, and it was, I asked them to wear, their crazy hats. So they had to find a hat to wear, and just kind of fun things to just continue to be hopeful. And I think the biggest thing as far as leaders is, just showing up. It's hard some days, you guys. It is hard. And just knowing that they can count on you, I think, is the biggest thing that I've tried to continue to stay motivated in myself to show up for the team. But you know, it's like other small things. Today, this week is Teacher Appreciation Week. So, you know, we have a school. So we're doing some virtual things to recognize our teachers. So it's maybe things that would happen anyway, but just highlighting it more, I guess. I don't know if that's the best answer, but just some of the things that we're doing.
Yeah, I agree, Joy. You know, I think we all may be feeling a lot of anxiety, especially in our positions, but how to really relate to my staff, letting them know, hey, we don't have all the answers, but we're trying really hard to navigate through this. And I communicate with my entire staff at least once a week, by just sending them an email on the updates. What are we doing? What are we planning to do? And a lot of them respond back to me, and I just take the time and respond back to each and every email that I can. You know, whatever it's saying, I'm just responding back to them. And I usually get maybe like 30 or 40 responses individually, but I just I'm taking out the time to do it. I'm jumping in on team Zoom calls, meetings if I can, just to, you know, show my support. When I see something really good that they're doing, we're posting it on social media. You know, we're giving everybody kudos, a shout out to the whole agency. And then a lot of people I'm lucky I don't have any staff directly impacted by COVID, but I do have, you know, family members of staff. So checking in on them on a regular basis if I can. So I'm sorry, I have a 6-year-old. It's meeting time at school. I do apologize. She's on Zoom with her teacher. So, you know, just as much as I can, just connecting with them. I think we're all feeling the same amount of stress and anxiety. And then also like working on our reactivation plans. So we have a task force working on that, have some team members on the task force so they can give input on what it feels like or what it looks like to come back into the workspace. So just keeping them as included as I possibly can. I'm hoping that's helping with morale.
I agree with a lot of that. I mean, one of the things that, and I apologize for getting meta here for a second, but aside from the tactical and strategic challenges that we all are facing right now, this is a pandemic that's challenging human norms, at least American norms or local norms. And so that's really turning everything on its head in the way that people are expected to interact and what they're used to. And that's really the most bewildering thing. And so we've spent a lot of time thinking about, and Christa just alluded to some of these things, how do you replicate some of the things that you would typically do in a physical environment virtually? We're doing a lot of what has already been mentioned. Joy, Christa have already mentioned a couple things that I will say. One, we are being as absolutely open and honest, at least as much as we can, without creating panic about what's to come. That goes a long way. I mean, it's not a fair proposition to try to pull the wool over staff's eyes about what might be coming. There might be furloughs. There might be layoffs. We might be going into a very difficult period. And so I think being as honest as we can be goes a long way. On a lighter note, one of the things that we've been doing, and I have a staff member who's just run with this, we have a daily 15-minute at noon every day opportunity for the staff to do something together over our Slack. So we use the Slack platform. And it's not, we do a virtual happy hour every Thursday afternoon. So that's through Zoom, but every other day of the week, there is a challenge out there that says, send a picture of something that you care about, or send a picture, send a picture of a doodle on how you're feeling today. So these little small micro activities that everyone gets to participate in if they choose to feel some sort of connection and bring some levity to it has worked out really well.
So the next question is from Robert.
Thanks. Before I became the executive director of the Jewish Children's Bureau, I was a special educator. I started the EDBD programs in District 214, and I was a professor and chairman of special ed at the College of William and Mary in Virginia. It's interesting, on Monday I was having a conversation with Seth Harkins, a colleague and friend. Seth has been the superintendent of education in Streamwood. He ran the ICG. Anyway, he's been around, he's professor at National Louis. And we were talking about virtual learning. And Eric has mentioned this a couple of times about the physical environment, the social skills. we figured, and you guys have already discussed several ways of dealing with the content learning. What I worry about are with younger children and with special needs children. Somebody mentioned working with autistic children. The social emotional learning is the most significant, or equally significant as the content learning. Matter of fact, of the 4 goals of the State Board of Education, 2 are academic and 2 are social emotional. And we were at a loss about how you create the kind of interactions that kids, that we do in small groups and that sort of stuff. And I wondered if any of you had any experience yet trying to deal with that aspect of children's learning and development virtually.
I think, bringing it back to the issue of how do we as nonprofit leaders, inspire, communicate, think about social emotional health of our team members, of our volunteers, of our donors, of our stakeholders, of the service providers, is really something that we all have to work on every day, because this keeps evolving, and the political landscape, the rules, and how it impacts people keeps changing on a day-to-day basis. And so I think, obviously we always want to focus on empathy and listening regardless of the situation, but I think how we support those things will continue to evolve and change. Joy, maybe you could speak specifically to emotional learning as it relates to individuals with special needs.
Yeah, I mentioned that, distance learning for the teachers has been really challenging, but, early on, along with the teachers, our clinicians got involved right away, because I think, we recognize that this is going to be hard for the families. And I kept emphasizing to the clinicians and the teachers, and I said, we're so focused on, we have to do these minutes for the IEP or different things. And, I said, let's take a minute and remember that they might be just making sure that their kid is safe, or maybe they're just making sure that, they're not, how do you manage difficult behaviors, at home? Now they're their family, right? So they obviously work with these kids all the time. But this is a new thing, learning and teaching. They're not teachers. So as far as the social emotional component, we've got, speech, we've got, psychologists, we have OT, and we really just try to, how do we do these teletherapies? How do we, whether it's a Zoom call or whether it's just getting on the phone if they don't have those capabilities. I don't know if we have all the right answers, but in some folks, it's just checking in. It's just having a phone call with the family and saying how you're doing, and then giving them support. These are the different techniques that maybe we use in the classroom. So, that's something that we continue to be challenged with in terms of, as Rachelle said, this is evolving. Emotions are going to change in how people feel. So I think it's something that we continue to be challenged with, but I think it's, again, trying to use the resources we have to connect with the families as best we can, and just recognize too that they're going through some hard things, and I think that's giving each other grace. I think is the other thing that we're trying to tell our staff and tell our families, and letting them know that they're doing good, even though it's challenging. Like, they're still doing a great job with their kids.
And the next question is from Jean.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's another question for Joy. You mentioned that over time with the pandemic, you found that you needed to put some HR policies in place. And I was wondering if you could share just a little bit more of what you felt needed to be explicit for virtual working.
So one of the things that we did in the school is our principal and her admin team did a great job of putting together a handbook, like a staff handbook, and really just outlined what we expected. Because some, like our paraprofessionals, those are like the teacher assistants for our kids. They didn't have as maybe they had a lesser role in distance learning than the teachers. So what expectations do we have for them? And some of those were simple, like they had to be available from 9 to 2. And check their emails. I mean, some of these things you guys already know, but we explicitly had to write that out in a handbook for them. because I think, we started thinking, I hate to think this way, but, what if down the road something were to happen, and how do we have those expectations, because we're not seeing them every day, and how do we hold folks accountable to that? So we first clearly had to say, this is what we expect you guys to do working from home. And then some of the other policies, the new policies, so you guys know, like the Family First Act came out, and some of those new things under extended leave. So those are some policies we put in place, and had to send notices to staff. So that's a new policy that we had to create. But I think it's really just taking what we did and formalizing that, and then laying those expectations out very clearly. And then, again, it's like, as far as having laptops, because we also had to assess what we had in our buildings and then deploy those out to our staff. So what are the expectations if they do have equipment in the home, and then how do we have IT support help them? So those are just some of the quick things we have in place. I think some of the other things is, how are we using PTO time now? So we had a discussion on that. How are we, what are the expectations around that? Because folks are working from home. So we're still working on some of those things, but that was things we did initially early on.
One small addition, I alluded to this earlier, but we also have to think through technology and privacy policies, putting privacy policies in place so that we protect employees that are using open books intellectual property, such as Zoom accounts and so on, and to protect kids. So that's something that we're also having to rethink and put into place.
Question is from Tom.
We talk a lot about planning for what's going to happen during and after the pandemic. And one of the things I'm curious about is how we're all thinking and working around normalcy. Are you looking at, when you plan, do you believe you're planning for a new normal? And what does that look like? Or are you hoping for the old normal to come back and the status quo to come back?
I recently heard a phrase coined, which I really loved, which is the weirds. I really love that. I don't like the new normal. And the reason I don't like the new normal is because it implies that we will never have a vaccine. We will never have treatments that are widely available in work. And those things just aren't true. We know, because there's been pandemics in the course of human recorded history, that we will eventually have a vaccine. And in fact, we'll have one sooner than we have in the past. And that's wonderful. So I think the new normal is really kind of a very grim thing to say. So I liked the idea of saying the weirds, meaning that we're in this weird period where we're all kind of working together to minimize the spread and to try and take care of one another emotionally and otherwise, and for the good of everyone, so that everyone, regardless of their age, regardless of their immunostatus, can survive this as best as possible. So getting to, how we think about the future, for me, I've thought about it in a couple ways. First, in trying to come up with a short-term strategy that my board could consider and approve, knowing that the plan is this would just be a short-term strategy because the situation with COVID will continue to evolve. And then in terms of thinking about what we do afterwards, we already had a great handle on providing services remotely, and we already had a great handle on volunteer recruitment and cultivation and the use of technology and the use of social media. So those things we had before, we're using them now, we'll use them in the future. And where it gets kind of complicated about the future is as we think about the financial aspects, right? Because as we talked about earlier in the discussion, all nonprofit organizations are being hit really hard by this. It's a catastrophe, and we don't know how long it will take for the economics of the situation to recover and what that will look like and to what extent that will happen. And so I think we're all trying to be flexible and creative, and just know that in the past, things that seemed true and were true for the first 42 years of ESC's existence might not be true in year 43 or 44, and kind of just being willing to evolve. And that way I'm really fortunate because I have a board and a leadership team that are very creative and open to adapting to ensure that we continue to meet our needs and our mission. But I wouldn't say that we're in a position to make long-term plans besides that long-term plan that will continue to exist and continue to have the same mission.
What I would say to that also is that you have to look at it as opportunities. We're never going to return. There's no going back to the way things were, because I think that the community, the social economic system, everything is being challenged. And I think that what it does is it challenges us as a not-for-profit to imagine what can be and figure out how we're going to carve out that strategy. You do need strong leadership. You need good board members. You need good volunteers, and you need capable staff who are also able to dream with you, to sort of say, okay, so this was yesterday's path based on all of these things being as is. Well, these 4 of the 5 things are no longer, and we don't know, we can't control them, and we don't know when they're going to be something that we can actually affect. So how do we lay plans, to Eric's point, A through E, right? These budgets, which are your strategies for how you're going to deliver services. Are you in the right geographical area? Can you expand now that you're boundaryless? Because now you can talk to people all over the United States. So are there new ways to collaborate and bring new ideas to the fold? Because we've now discovered, I don't know, Zoom was a thing before 8 weeks ago. I don't know, I must have been under a rock, but now I know about Zoom and I'm like, and so I think that I think that the challenges and the opportunities are a lot in lockstep on this one.
But Marshall, can you ask your question?
Yes, it's for Rachelle, but before I do that, I just want to comment about how heroic these 4 panelists have been. If I had a medal, I'd pin one on each one of them for the job they're doing under these terrible, terrible circumstances. I'm sorry, Rachel's also one of the panelists. So 5 all deserve a medal. Since I haven't been on a project in a very long time, I'm curious, does ESC have some active clients now? And are we relating to them, and how are we doing that? That may be the second half of the meeting, but if it's not, I'm asking it now.
Marshall, thank you for the virtual honor. I appreciate it. We do have clients now, and in fact, we had a couple of contracts come in this week, and we'll kind of delve into what that looks like in the second half of our conversation after the panelists. But I do agree with you that the challenge that we're all facing is extraordinary, and I really commend both my fellow panelists and everyone in this call for being so committed to spending this challenging time doing everything in your power to ensure that our community gets through it and is stronger.
Bob, and then Kathy will have the last question.
Very good, and thank you again. This has been very excellent. Just a question to the panelists. You know, you went through a period of massive adjustment to deliver to your constituents. Are you getting to a point where actually your team may have a little bit of bandwidth to go look at some other things? Because a number of things may have dropped off that you can't do anymore. So is this an opportunity for your organizations? And it also will keep those people, you know, stimulated in the game. So I'm just curious if you're hitting a point where you actually have bandwidth for your team to maybe take a look at the big picture.
I think one of the other panelists mentioned it earlier. It has been, you know, kind of after the first maybe 2 weeks, when you just felt like you were in the middle of a fire, and you had to respond to it. I think maybe by the 3rd and 4th week, I'm like, okay, I can adjust to this pause, right? Because it is a pause that you can start evaluating things differently. And you know, how now that we know that this is initially, to be honest, like on, what was it, March 18th when we started this, I thought it was gonna be like a week or two. I'm like, okay, so I was just like in this rush because I'm thinking a week or two. Now, you know, I'm hearing like the rest of the year is gonna be the weirds, as Rachelle mentioned. So now I'm just really having time, because usually in my world, I'm always just responding. I'm responding all the time. I don't have any time to really think or pause or take a break. So now this is very abnormal for me to like really have the time to sit down, plan out things, and you know, get everybody together, meet with them individually, and think through how to move forward. And because of that, we have thought about how we can, I mentioned earlier technology, like how we might use technology or will use technology in the future to make our programming more robust and to connect more with people. So I think the time has been, a blessing in some ways to think about how to move forward. I see one of my old volunteers, Chris Hogan, on the call today. We have lots of plans that we haven't been able to roll out yet, that have been sitting on the shelf for a while. So, now I can pull those out and say, hey, how do I update these things? And when we get back into the office, because staff are getting a little anxious, no, we're used to working in our offices. So we have people volunteering, like, can I come help deliver food today? I just want to get out the house. So I think people will have lots of energy to be able to move us forward. So that, when I look at that, it is rather excited about, as long as we keep our funding and the doors stay open, I feel really good that we'll be able to make a really strong.
I also alluded to this earlier. I mentioned the idea of us having some time to experiment and treat this as a lab. And the staff has responded well to that. I think, since I've already mentioned that, I think there's something existential about it. And our board even mentioned this. They in a call a few weeks ago said, when push comes to shove, and especially if we're looking at doomsday stuff and we're so on, like, what's really important to us? What are our core values when we stand back and think about what we might have to get rid of and what we absolutely have to keep? It's a nice moment to gain some clarity. I always loved the idea with Apple, right? They cannibalize one product for the next. So the iPod might be doing successfully well, but the iPhone comes along, and that analogy tends to lend well here, where it's like, what could we do better in service to children and kids and families, where we've maybe rested on our laurels, not even knowing it. The perspective that we get from this is pretty remarkable. And I think all of a sudden there's a switch that's gone on in my collective board's head, where they're going, maybe this isn't business as usual. Maybe we need to stop and use this as a moment to pressure test the things that really matter to us.
If I can just say one more thing, going back to the innovation, I think we have a van that we've used historically just to transport clients from point A to B. And as we're thinking about moving our services to where youth are, we're thinking about reinventing our van as a mobile unit to travel through all of our 59 communities, to start finding places where we know there may be youth who are frequenting libraries, opportunity centers, or McDonald's, or places where we know there are pockets of youth. In the suburbs, you don't find youth on the street. You find them couch surfing, but they are collecting in public spaces. So as we start to see a gradual lift, it's becoming more visible to the kids who need us, as an extension of our Text for Helpline, as an extension of our social media channels, to just make sure that the kids who need us can find us and grab hygiene kits or jeans and t-shirts off of our van, so that we can build that connection with kids, and then they know that we exist. So I'm frankly equally as anxious and excited about this pivot that we are on.
Okay, Kathy, you want to ask the last question?
So I think that when we talk about, the weirds and the future, I think that what this pandemic has really shown us is that we have a lot of flaws in the systems that we have today. For example, the healthcare system, the educational system. And so I think that this may be a great opportunity to revamp some of these systems when we return. How we can do that, I don't know. I think it's going to be a very, very much a collaborative effort, certainly a collaborative effort on the part of your organizations. For example, we've got a lot of people that are marginalized during this period of time. Our service workers are typically, Black or brown. And then we have, the children that you're serving, you're talking about the disabled, and that you're depending upon contributions from people, their goodness of their heart, when these should be things in our society that we do support with our tax dollars. So I feel like, I don't want us to really come out of this and be like, okay, business as usual. And I know that probably won't happen, but there's such an opportunity here. And I feel like, the people that are here in this Zoom call are the people that could bring this to the attention of whomever, and let's make this better because of what we've experienced. It's not really a question, I guess. It's just a thing that's on my mind. Thank you.
I think we're all thinking about that. I think, Kathy, you've hit something that we're all working through, and our panelists are on the front lines of, and providing those social services and those services to youth. It's going to make, a couple people have talked about, home education, homeschooling in this period. Well, here we have a whole bunch of kids whose schooling is not only interrupted, but is new. And this is going to change how they view their future. And for all of you who touch youth social services, what a great opportunity that Kathy was talking about, making the change, making the big broad change, because that's part of all of your missions, and you are all living them. Thank you to our panelists. And as I said, if you wanted to ask a question, you didn't get a chance, shoot it off to Rachelle, because I'm sure we can get some answers for you.